The rifle shot split the morning air before Helena Pierce could even finish shouting the warning, and she watched in fury as the lead steer bolted sideways, taking half the herd with it into a panicked scatter across the Arizona scrubland. Owen Fletcher lowered his Winchester with that infuriating grin she had despised for 7 long years, ever since they were both 16 and he had won the county riding competition by cutting her off at the final turn, a move that cost her the prize money her struggling family desperately needed back in 1872. Now it was 1879, and here they stood in the dusty outskirts of Fort Yuma, California, both 23 years old and still unable to exchange civil words. The cattle drive that would take 2,000 head north through treacherous territory had just become infinitely more complicated, because the foreman had paired them as partners for the entire journey. Helena's hands trembled with rage as she spurred her mare forward, racing to cut off the scattered cattle before they reached the rocky canyon where they would be impossible to retrieve. Her dark auburn hair, tied back in a practical braid, whipped behind her as she leaned low over the horse's neck. She had spent 5 years proving herself as capable as any man on her father's ranch after he died, taking over operations when most people expected her mother to sell. The last thing she needed was Owen Fletcher undermining her authority in front of the entire outfit. Owen rode up beside her, his buckskin gelding matching her mare's pace stride for stride. "If you had moved the herd when I signaled instead of arguing, they would not have spooked," he called over the thundering hooves. "You fired without warning," Helena shot back, her green eyes blazing. That coyote was already moving away from the cattle. It was circling back. "I have been driving cattle since I could sit a horse. I know predator behavior." They managed to turn the lead steers, working in tandem despite their mutual animosity, and gradually brought the scattered animals back toward the main herd. The other drovers had contained most of the cattle, and the foreman, a grizzled man named Samuel Brennan, sat watching them with an expression that mixed exasperation with something that might have been amusement. "You two done showing off?" Brennan called when they returned. "Because we have 600 miles ahead of us, and I will not tolerate this nonsense the entire way." Helena dismounted, wiping sweat from her forehead. The California heat was brutal even in early April, and the trek north would only get more challenging as they climbed into higher elevations. "Mr. Brennan, with respect, I cannot work with someone who acts without coordination. This drive requires teamwork." "Funny, I was about to say the same thing," Owen said, swinging down from his saddle. He was tall and lean, built like someone who had spent his life working hard rather than growing soft. His dark hair was perpetually sun-streaked, and his blue eyes held a sharpness that Helena associated with constant judgment. "Miss Pierce seems to think she invented cattle driving. I think I know how to do my job without some arrogant ranch hand second-guessing every decision." "Ranch hand?" Owen's voice dropped dangerously low. "I own 300 acres of prime grazing land. This drive is helping fund my expansion. I am not some drifter looking for wages." Helena had not known that. 7 years ago, Owen's family had been struggling just as much as hers. Apparently, he had managed to build something substantial. The knowledge stung more than she wanted to admit. Brennan held up his hands. "Enough. You are both here because you are the best riders I have. Helena, your father was the finest cattleman in 3 counties, and you learned from him. Owen, you have brought in drives through territory that would make grown men quit. I need both of you, which means you need to figure out how to work together. We leave at dawn and you will ride as partners. That means watching each other's backs, coordinating movements, and keeping this herd safe and moving. Understood?" Helena wanted to argue, but Brennan was right. This drive represented a significant investment for her ranch. She had pooled resources with 3 neighboring ranches to assemble this herd, and the sale price in the northern mining towns would determine whether she could make improvements before winter or spend another year barely scraping by. Pride was a luxury she could not afford. "Understood," she said stiffly. Owen gave a curt nod. "Fine, but I follow proven methods, not improvisation." "As if I improvise," Helena muttered, but she walked away before the argument could reignite. That night, the camp sprawled across a flat area near a creek. 18 drovers, a cook, a wrangler, and Brennan made up the outfit. Helena had her own bedroll slightly apart from the main group, a concession Brennan had made after she proved herself on a smaller drive 2 years earlier. Some of the men had grumbled about having a woman along, but her skill had silenced most complaints. Owen, she noticed, set up his gear on the opposite side of the camp. The cook, a jovial man named Pete who had survived the Civil War and decided the frontier was safer than returning home, served up beans and salt pork. Helena took her plate and sat near the fire, listening to the low conversations of men anticipating the long journey ahead. Several drovers were young, barely 18, earning money for their own stakes. Others were veterans of multiple drives, their faces weathered and their stories worn smooth from retelling. Owen sat with a group discussing the route. His voice carried across the camp, confident and measured as he described the terrain ahead. Despite her resentment, Helena found herself listening. He knew the trail well, had made this journey 4 times before. She had done one major drive, and though it had gone smoothly, she understood the difference experience made. "Miss Pierce," Brennan called, motioning her over to his wagon. She joined him, and he unrolled a map across the tailgate. "I want you and Fletcher to scout ahead tomorrow afternoon. There is a river crossing about 15 miles north. We need to know the water level and whether the banks are stable enough for the herd." "You are really committed to making us work together," Helena said. "I am committed to a successful drive. You two are eating each other alive, and it will poison the whole outfit if it continues. So yes, I am forcing the issue." Brennan's expression softened slightly. "Your father would have handled it the same way. Sometimes the best fighters make the best partners once they stop competing. Owen Fletcher and I have history. Most people who hate each other do, but out here history does not matter much. Survival does, trust does." He tapped the map. "Scout the crossing. Report back before sundown. That gives you both a chance to remember you are on the same side." Helena wanted to argue, but Brennan had already dismissed her with a nod and turned to discuss supply inventory with Pete. She walked back to her bedroll, passing Owen on the way. He glanced up, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. She saw wariness there and something else she could not quite identify. Then he looked away, and she continued to her spot beneath the stars. Sleep came slowly. The sounds of the camp gradually faded as men settled into their bedrolls, leaving only the night watch and the constant murmur of 2,000 cattle. Helena stared up at the vast expanse of stars, thinking about the months ahead. 600 miles. Every day spent in close proximity to the one person who represented everything she resented about her past failures. The riding competition 7 years ago had been more than just a loss. The prize money would have allowed her father to buy medicine he desperately needed. Instead, Owen won, and her father's condition worsened through that winter. He survived, but he was never quite as strong, and when he died 3 years later, Helena could not help but trace a line back to that moment when Owen cut her off and took the victory. It was not fair to blame him entirely. She knew that intellectually, but the heart held grudges the mind had long since examined and dismissed. Dawn came with a pink-orange glow across the eastern horizon. The camp erupted into organized chaos as drovers rolled up gear, saddled horses, and prepared to move the herd. Helena checked her mare's hooves and tack, then mounted and took her position on the right flank as the cattle began to move. Owen rode point with two other experienced hands, keeping the lead steers on course. The morning passed without incident. The herd moved steadily north, raising dust that coated everything in a fine layer of grit. Helena kept watch for stragglers, working with a young drover named Tommy to keep the animals bunched properly. The sun climbed higher, and the temperature rose steadily. By noon, she had drained half her canteen and was already looking forward to the creek Brennan had marked on the map for their midday stop. After the brief rest, Brennan called her and Owen over. "Time for that scouting run. Follow the main trail north. You should reach the river in 3 hours. Check the crossing, look for signs of trouble, and get back here before dark." Owen nodded and rode off without waiting for Helena. She glared at his back and urged her mare forward to catch up. They rode in silence for the first hour, both clearly unwilling to break the impasse. The landscape gradually shifted from scrubland to rolling hills dotted with sage and juniper. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding thermals in lazy spirals. Finally, Owen spoke without looking at her. "We need to establish some basic signals. If we are scouting together, we should be able to communicate without shouting." It was a practical suggestion which made it harder to argue against. "Fine. What did you have in mind?" One raised hand means stop. 2 hands means danger. Pointing with the whole arm indicates direction of travel or interest. "That is basic trail sign. I already know it. Then we have no problem." Owen's tone was neutral, but Helena detected the faintest edge of sarcasm. They continued in renewed silence. Helena found herself studying him peripherally, noticing details she had actively ignored for years. He rode with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in the saddle, his posture relaxed but alert. His gear was well maintained, his horse healthy and responsive. Whatever else she might think of Owen Fletcher, he was clearly a competent outdoorsman. The river appeared as they crested a rise, a ribbon of brown water cutting through the landscape. They approached cautiously, and Helena immediately saw the problem. The water level was higher than it should have been for this time of year, probably from snowmelt in the distant mountains. The banks were muddy and steep on both sides. Owen dismounted and walked to the water's edge, studying the current. Helena joined him, careful to maintain some distance. Up close, she caught the scent of leather and sage, distinctly masculine and oddly distracting. "Current is strong," Owen observed. "We will need to find a better crossing or wait for the water to drop. Waiting costs time. Every day we lose is a day the herd is not gaining weight on better grazing." Helena scanned the river in both directions. There might be a better spot upstream or downstream. The map shows this is the traditional crossing for a reason. Tradition does not account for unusual weather conditions. Owen turned to face her directly. "Do you always have to argue every single point? Do you always have to assume you are right?" Helena shot back. They stood there, tension crackling between them like heat lightning. Owen's jaw tightened, and for a moment Helena thought he might actually yell. Instead, he took a deliberate breath and said, "Let us split up. You check upstream, I will go downstream. We meet back here in 1 hour." It was a reasonable compromise, which irritated Helena because she wanted to keep being angry. "Fine. 1 hour." She mounted and rode upstream, following the river as it curved through increasingly rocky terrain. The banks remained steep and treacherous, offering no obvious improvement over the original crossing. She pushed on, aware of time passing, until she spotted something that made her pull up short. Tracks. Fresh tracks, multiple horses, heading south along the river. Helena dismounted and examined them closely. At least 6 horses, possibly more, and the depth of the impressions suggested they were carrying weight. Raiders or rustlers, most likely, scouting the area. Her pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of information Brennan needed. She marked the spot in her memory and turned back, arriving at the original crossing point just as Owen rode up from the downstream direction. His expression was grim. No better options downstream. The banks actually get worse. We will have to, he stopped, reading her face. What did you find? Tracks, recent, multiple riders heading south. Helena pointed upstream, about a mile in that direction. Owen's entire demeanor changed, shifting into sharp focus. Show me. They rode together to the spot, and Owen dismounted to study the tracks himself. His examination was thorough and professional. After several minutes, he straightened. You are right. 6 horses, probably 7. They passed through this morning. He looked around, his gaze sweeping the surrounding terrain. If they are scouting, they know about the trail and the drive. We need to get back and warn Brennan. Agreed. Owen met her eyes, and for the first time there was no antagonism in his expression, only shared concern. Fast ride back. Stay alert. They mounted and set off at a ground-eating lope, pushing their horses but not hard enough to exhaust them. Helena kept scanning the landscape, every sense heightened. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the hills. Halfway back, Owen suddenly raised one hand. Helena stopped immediately, following his gaze. Movement on a distant ridge, barely visible. Riders, silhouetted against the sky for just a moment before disappearing. Too far away to identify, but the timing was suspicious. They might be tracking the herd, Helena said quietly, or waiting to see where we camp tonight. Owen looked at her. We need to ride wide, come in from a different angle so they cannot follow us directly. It meant adding distance and time, but it was smart. Helena nodded and they veered east, taking a looping route that would bring them to the camp from an unexpected direction. The detour cost them nearly an hour, and by the time they arrived, the sun was touching the horizon. Brennan listened to their report with increasing concern. 7 riders means they are too bold to be simple drifters. Could be Comancheros, could be former Confederate raiders turned outlaw, could be local boys who got greedy. He called over his 2 most experienced drovers. Double the night watch. 4 men at all times positioned at cardinal points around the herd. No fires after full dark. We move out 2 hours before dawn. The camp became a flurry of quiet, efficient activity. Men checked their weapons and prepared for potential trouble. The cheerful atmosphere of the previous night evaporated, replaced by grim determination. Helena cleaned her rifle, a Winchester her father had given her on her 18th birthday, and checked her ammunition. Owen appeared beside her as she worked. You did good work spotting those tracks. The compliment caught her off guard. You did good work reading them. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. We might make decent partners after all. Do not get ahead of yourself, Fletcher. But there was no real heat in her words, and from his expression, Owen knew it. He settled down a few feet away, cleaning his own rifle in the fading light. They worked in companionable silence, and Helena found it strange how natural it felt after years of hostility. The night passed without incident, though Helena barely slept during her off-watch hours. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow potentially threatening. When Brennan roused the camp in the pre-dawn darkness, she felt exhausted but wired, adrenaline overriding fatigue. They moved the herd out quietly, pushing the pace slightly to put distance between themselves and the river crossing. The cattle, disturbed by the unusual early start, were fractious and required constant attention. Helena worked her position with focused intensity, and she noticed Owen doing the same at point. Whatever their differences, they both understood the stakes. The morning sun revealed empty landscape behind them, no sign of pursuit. Gradually, the tension eased. By midday, Brennan called a brief halt and allowed a small fire for coffee. Helena gratefully accepted a cup from Pete, the hot, bitter liquid cutting through her exhaustion. "Your father would be proud of you," Brennan said, sitting beside her. "Keeping your head in a crisis, that is what separates good cattlemen from dead ones. I just hope we do not have to test that further. In my experience, trouble finds you whether you hope for it or not. But you have good instincts, trust them." He glanced across the camp to where Owen was checking his horse's shoes. "And trust your partner. I saw how you two worked together yesterday. Whatever history you have, you can put it aside when necessary." Could she? Helena thought about the ride back, the way they had moved in sync without needing to discuss plans, each understanding what needed to be done. It had felt surprisingly natural, as if they had been partners for years, instead of enemies. The afternoon brought them into more varied terrain, hills giving way to stretches of grassland interspersed with rocky outcroppings. The herd spread out more, taking advantage of the better grazing. Helena rode wide on the flank, enjoying the brief respite from constant vigilance. The sky was impossibly blue, cloudless and vast. A small herd of pronghorn antelope watched from a distance, then bounded away in graceful arcs. This was why she loved this life, despite its hardships. The freedom of open country, the satisfaction of working with animals, the constant challenge that demanded everything she had. Her mother had begged her to sell the ranch and move to San Francisco, where distant cousins could help her find a proper husband and settle into respectable society. The thought made Helena want to laugh. She would suffocate in that world. Owen rode up beside her, breaking her reverie. "Brennan wants us to scout ahead again. There is supposed to be a good camping spot near a spring about 8 miles north. He wants to make sure it is still viable." Another scouting run together. He is definitely forcing the issue. "Is it working?" Owen's tone was light, almost teasing. Helena glanced at him, surprised. "Maybe. Do not let it go to your head." They set off together, falling into an easy pace. The landscape rolled past, and Helena found herself actually comfortable with the silence. It was not the loaded, hostile silence of before, but something more natural. Two people moving through country they both loved, needing no words. The spring appeared exactly where the map indicated, a reliable water source bubbling up from rocks and forming a small pool before trickling away into the grass. The area around it was flat and clear, perfect for bedding down a large herd. Owen dismounted and tasted the water, nodding approval. "Clean and cold. This will work well." He looked around, assessing sight lines and escape routes with a practiced eye. Good visibility in all directions, harder for anyone to approach without being seen. Helena had noticed the same things. "We make camp here, keep tight watch, and we should be relatively safe. You have a good tactical mind. My father taught me to think like prey and predator at the same time, always know where danger could come from, always have an escape route." Owen studied her with an expression she could not quite read. "I did not know your father well, but everyone respected him. His death was a loss to the whole community." It was the first time Owen had ever mentioned her father directly, and the sincerity in his voice caught Helena completely off guard. "Thank you. He was a good man. I remember he testified on behalf of the Garcia family when some ranchers tried to force them off their land. That took courage in those days, still does." Helena remembered that too. Her father had believed in fairness regardless of origin, a position that had made him unpopular with some of the more bigoted settlers. He taught me that right is right, no matter who is involved. My father was similar. He used to hire Paiute workers during harvest season, paid them the same as white workers, got threats for it, but he never backed down. Owen's voice held quiet pride. I think that is part of why I built my own ranch. I wanted to do things the right way, not the easy way. It was the most personal conversation they had ever had, and Helena felt something shift in her perception of Owen. She had held on to her anger for so long that she had never considered he might be more than just the person who beat her in one competition. He had his own struggles, his own principles, his own story. The competition, she said abruptly. 7 years ago, I need to ask you something. Owen tensed slightly. All right. Did you cut me off deliberately? Was it strategy or accident? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the spring. It was deliberate. I needed that prize money desperately. My father was about to lose the ranch, and I had promised him I would win enough to make a payment to the bank. He turned to face her. I knew you needed it too. I saw your father in the crowd, saw he was not well, but I made a choice to save my own family first. The honesty was like a punch to the gut. Helena had expected denial or excuses. Instead, Owen had simply admitted the truth. You won. My father did not get his medicine as quickly as he needed. I know, and I have thought about that race probably 1,000 times since. If I could go back, I do not know if I would make a different choice. My father would have lost everything. Owen's voice was raw. But I am sorry your father suffered for it. That is a weight I have carried. Helena did not know what to say. She had built her hatred on the foundation of that one moment, but now, hearing Owen's side, it crumbled into something more complicated. He had been 16, desperate, trying to save his family just as she had been trying to save hers. There was no villain in that story, just two young people in impossible circumstances. I have hated you for 7 years, she said finally. I know. I hated that you hated me, which somehow made me resent you in return. Easier than feeling guilty. We have wasted a lot of time on anger. Yes. Owen stepped closer, his blue eyes intense. But maybe it is not too late to waste less time going forward. Helena's heart did something strange in her chest, a flutter that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the sudden awareness of how close Owen was standing, how the afternoon light caught the sun's streaks in his hair, how his voice had gone soft and rough at the same time. She stepped back, needing distance. We should get back. Brennan will want this information before he brings the herd in. If Owen was disappointed, he hid it well. You are right. Let us ride. The return journey felt different, charged with unspoken thoughts. Helena's mind raced, trying to process the shift that had occurred. She had defined herself against Owen Fletcher for so long that removing that animosity left her unbalanced, unsure of her footing. They reported to Brennan, who approved the camping spot and ordered the herd directed toward the spring. As the sun set and the cattle settled, Helena found herself watching Owen across the camp, seeing him with new eyes. He was patient with young Tommy, showing him how to properly secure a lasso. He shared his coffee ration with one of the older drovers who had run out. He checked on horses with the wrangler, discussing a mare who was favoring one leg. These were not the actions of the selfish, arrogant competitor she had built him up to be in her mind. This was a good man, competent and considerate. How had she missed it for so long? Or rather, how had she refused to see it? That night, as she lay in her bedroll, Helena heard footsteps approaching. Owen appeared, silhouetted against the starlight. May I sit? She nodded, not trusting her voice. He settled a respectful distance away, arms resting on his knees. I have been thinking about what you said earlier, about wasting time on anger. He paused. I would like to not waste any more time if you are willing. What does that mean exactly? It means I would like to know you. The real you, not the person I convinced myself you were to justify my own guilt. I think you are brave and skilled and stubborn as hell, and I would like the chance to see what else you are. Helena's breath caught. Owen, you do not have to answer now. I just wanted you to know. This drive gives us time, and I intend to use it. He stood. Sleep well, Helena. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her staring after him with her mind in chaos. When had his voice saying her first name become something that made her skin feel too warm? When had the sight of him become something she actively sought out? This was dangerous territory, far more treacherous than any river crossing or outlaw threat. This was her heart starting to recognize something her mind had forbidden for years, and she had no idea what to do about it. The next days fell into a rhythm. They drove north steadily, covering 12 to 15 miles per day depending on terrain and the herd's condition. Helena and Owen scouted ahead regularly, and each trip felt like a conversation, sometimes spoken aloud, more often conducted through glances and small gestures. She learned that he had taught himself to read using the family Bible and a collection of dime novels his mother had cherished. He learned that she loved thunderstorms and could identify birds by their calls. They shared stories of cattle drives and horse trading, of harsh winters survived and good seasons celebrated. Gradually, the years of animosity were replaced by something that felt like friendship. But it was more than friendship, and they both knew it. There were moments when their hands brushed reaching for the same map, when their eyes met across a campfire and held a beat too long, when Helena caught herself imagining what it would feel like if Owen touched her intentionally, deliberately. 2 weeks into the drive, they hit serious trouble. The herd was fording a wide, shallow river when a flash flood roared down from a canyon, the result of a sudden storm in the mountains. Brennan shouted warnings, but the water was already rising, transforming the gentle crossing into a churning torrent. Helena was in the middle of the river when the flood hit. Her mare screamed and reared as a wall of brown water smashed into them. Helena kicked free of the stirrups just before the horse went down, plunging her into the icy, violent current. She fought for the surface, lungs burning, arms and legs pumping against water that pulled her like grasping hands. Something solid hit her shoulder, a piece of driftwood. She grabbed it, using it to keep her head above water as the flood swept her downstream. The banks were too steep to reach, the current too strong to swim against. Panic clawed at her chest. She could die here, could drown in this anonymous river, and her mother would never know what happened. Then she heard hooves, thundering alongside the river. Owen appeared on the bank, his buckskin running flat out. He had a rope in his hands, and as Helena watched, he built a loop and swung it over his head. The throw was perfect, the loop settling around her shoulders. She grabbed the rope with both hands as Owen wrapped his end around the saddle horn and turned the buckskin away from the river. The rope went taut, jerking Helena hard enough to make her gasp. But it held, and inch by inch, Owen and his horse dragged her toward the bank. She scrabbled for purchase on the muddy slope, her boots finally finding solid ground. Owen dismounted and pulled her up the rest of the way, his hands strong on her arms. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, his eyes scanning her frantically. Helena was shaking, cold and shock hitting her simultaneously. "I am all right. My horse, the Wrangler, got her. She made it out downstream." Owen pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her completely. "God, Helena, when I saw you go under," she clung to him, feeling his heart racing against her cheek. He was warm and solid and real, and she was alive because of him. The terror of the past minutes caught up with her all at once, and she trembled violently. "I have you," Owen murmured into her hair. "You are safe. I have you." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped around each other on the muddy riverbank. When Helena finally pulled back enough to look up at his face, she saw raw emotion there, fear and relief and something else that made her breath catch. "Owen," she whispered. He kissed her. It was not gentle or tentative, but fierce and desperate, a declaration. Helena kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his wet shirt. 7 years of anger transformed into something completely different, burning through her like wildfire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I could not lose you." "Not now. Not when I just figured out that he stopped, swallowed hard. "Helena, I think I am falling in love with you." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt like coming home. "I think I am falling in love with you too. I do not know when it happened. Maybe it was always going to happen. Maybe we just needed time to get out of our own way." He kissed her again, softer this time. "But I know I want more time. All the time. Every day for the rest of my life if you will give it to me." "We are in the middle of a cattle drive," Helena said, but she was smiling. "Then when we finish this drive, I am going to court you properly. I am going to ask your mother for permission to call on you. I am going to bring you flowers and take you to dances and do everything right." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "And eventually, if you will have me, I am going to marry you." Helena's heart felt too large for her chest. "That is quite a plan. Is it one you could agree to?" She thought about her years of hatred, how pointless it all seemed now. She thought about the past weeks, learning to see Owen clearly. She thought about almost dying minutes ago and how his face had been her first thought, his name the word she had tried to say. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They rode back to the camp together, and if the entire outfit noticed their hands linked between horses, no one commented directly. Brennan caught Helena's eye and gave her a small nod, something knowing in his expression. Pete grinned and made sure their coffee cups were always full that evening. Young Tommy kept sneaking glances at them like they were characters in one of his adventure books. The drive continued north, through increasingly beautiful country. They climbed into foothills where pine forests replaced scrubland, where cold streams ran clear over colored stones, where wildflowers carpeted meadows in riots of yellow and purple. The herd fattened on good grass, and the men settled into the comfortable competence of a crew working well together. Helena and Owen no longer needed to be assigned as partners. They gravitated toward each other naturally, working as a single unit. They scouted ahead together, rode night watch together, shared meals and stories and long silences that needed no filling. Slowly, carefully, they built something real between them. One evening, 3 weeks into the drive, they rode to the top of a ridge to watch the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and gold, the clouds edged in fire. Below them, the herd spread across a valley like a living carpet. Owen sat close beside her, their shoulders touching. "Tell me about your ranch," Helena said. "The 300 acres you are expanding. It is good land, near a reliable water source. I have 50 head of breeding cattle, mostly longhorn mixed with some shorethorn stock for better meat quality. A small house, nothing fancy but solid. A barn I built myself with help from 2 Paiute men who know more about construction than anyone I have met." He paused. "It is lonely sometimes. I built it thinking I would always be alone, that I had made too many mistakes to deserve companionship." "You were 16 years old making an impossible choice. That is not a mistake worth punishing yourself for forever. I know that now, mostly because you forgave me." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes soft in the fading light. "What about your ranch? What do you need there?" "A new barn roof before winter. The current one has been patched too many times, better fencing on the north pasture, a breeding bull if I can afford it after this sale." She smiled ruefully. "It is a long list. What if you had help? What if it was not just your burden?" Helena understood what he was really asking. "You are talking about after the drive, after the courting and the marriage you promised. I am talking about a partnership. Your land and mine are only 40 miles apart. We could combine operations, share resources, build something bigger and stronger than either of us could alone." He took her hand. "But more than that, I am talking about coming home every night to you, waking up beside you every morning, building a life together." It was a beautiful dream, and for the first time in years, Helena let herself actually want something beyond mere survival. "I would like that. All of it." Owen kissed her as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and Helena felt like she was finally exactly where she was meant to be. The final weeks of the drive brought them into the northern territories, where mining towns had sprung up like mushrooms after rain. The demand for beef was high, and Brennan negotiated an excellent price for the herd. The drovers would return south with wagons full of payment and supplies, the long journey validated by success. Helena stood with Owen as the final count was completed, watching 2,000 head of cattle flow into the holding pens. "We did it. Actually did it. You sound surprised." "Maybe a little. This was the biggest gamble I have ever taken." She looked at him. "In more ways than one. Are you having regrets?" "Not even slightly." The outfit celebrated that night with a real meal in a real restaurant, their first time indoors in nearly 2 months. Helena sat beside Owen, acutely aware of the curious and approving glances from the other drovers. By now, everyone knew they were together, and most seemed genuinely happy about it. Brennan raised his glass in a toast to a successful drive. To good men and one extraordinary woman who proved that skill matters more than prejudice, to safe returns and prosperous futures. He looked directly at Helena and Owen, and to partnerships that make us all stronger. They drank to that, and Helena felt tears prick her eyes. This journey had given her so much more than money. It had given her Owen, given her confidence, given her a place in a community that respected her. The return journey was faster without the herd, the wagon train making good time. Helena and Owen rode together, talking about their future with increasing specificity. They would combine the ranches, keep both properties running until they determined the best configuration. They would host a dance to introduce Helena's mother to Owen properly, though he was nervous about that meeting. "She will love you," Helena assured him. "She might remember me as the boy who beat her daughter in a race. She will see you as the man who saved her daughter's life and makes her happy. Trust me." When they finally reached Fort Yuma, dusty and exhausted but triumphant, Helena directed Owen to her ranch. It was late afternoon, the sun slanting golden across the yard. Her mother came out of the house, shading her eyes, and then broke into a run when she recognized Helena. "Thank God," Margaret Pierce said, hugging her daughter tightly. "I worried every single day." "I am fine, Mama, better than fine." Helena pulled back and gestured to Owen, who had dismounted and stood holding his hat respectfully. "Mama, this is Owen Fletcher. He is the man I am going to marry." Margaret's eyes widened, and she looked between them with dawning understanding. "Fletcher, you are the boy from the riding competition." "Yes, madam, and I owe you an apology for what that cost your family. I have spent 7 years regretting that day." Owen met her gaze steadily. "But I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure Helena never regrets choosing me." Margaret studied him for a long moment, and Helena held her breath. Then her mother smiled. "Well then, you had better come inside and tell me everything. I want to hear how my stubborn daughter finally fell in love." Over coffee and fresh bread, They told the story of the cattle drive, editing out the more dangerous moments to spare Margaret's worry. But the important parts came through. The reluctant partnership, the gradual thawing, the moment by the river when everything changed. Margaret listened with shining eyes, occasionally reaching over to squeeze Helena's hand. "Your father would have liked him," she said finally. "He always believed people could grow beyond their mistakes." "I wish he could be here," Helena said softly. "He is. In you, in the ranch you have kept running, in the life you are building." Margaret turned to Owen. "You have my blessing, young man, but I expect you to treat my daughter with the respect and love she deserves." "I intend to treat her like the miracle she is," Owen said simply. They were married 6 weeks later in a small church in Fort Yuma. Helena wore a dress her mother had carefully preserved from her own wedding, ivory lace and silk that smelled faintly of lavender. Owen wore a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes bright with emotion as he watched Helena walk down the aisle. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Samuel Brennan stood as Owen's best man, gruffly pleased to be included. Several drovers from the cattle drive attended, along with neighboring ranchers and townspeople. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed Helena with such tenderness that several women in the audience openly wept. The reception was held at Helena's ranch, tables set up in the yard, Pete cooking an enormous feast. Musicians played fiddles and guitars, and couples danced on a platform built specially for the occasion. Helena danced with Owen, with Brennan, with young Tommy who had grown at least 3 inches over the summer. She danced with her mother and saw joy in Margaret's face that had been absent for too long. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Owen pulled Helena away from the crowd, leading her toward the barn. They climbed to the loft and sat in the open door, legs dangling, looking out over the celebration below. "Happy?" Owen asked. "So happy I almost do not recognize myself." Helena leaned against his shoulder. "Who would have thought that hating someone could turn into this? I think we never really hated each other. We just did not know how to stop fighting long enough to see clearly." He wrapped an arm around her. "But we figured it out eventually. We had help. Brennan forcing us together, the drive giving us time and space, and a flash flood that nearly killed you and made me realize I could not live without you." Owen's voice was light, but Helena heard the undercurrent of remembered fear. "That was rather dramatic. You are worth the drama." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Below, the party continued, voices and laughter drifting up on the evening breeze. This was their life now, Helena thought. This community, this land, this man beside her. It was more than she had ever dreamed of having. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, learning to share space and decisions and the mundane details of daily life. They divided their time between the 2 ranches, eventually deciding to keep both operational with hired help to manage the property they were not actively living on. The combined operation was strong enough to weather a hard winter that devastated some of their neighbors. Helena discovered that Owen snored when he was particularly tired, and that he made excellent biscuits, and that he had a habit of bringing her wildflowers for no reason except that he saw them and thought of her. Owen learned that Helena sang while she worked, that she was afraid of spiders but not much else, that she could outride him on a good day and graciously let him win on others. They worked side by side every day, mending fences and training horses and planning for the future. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in each other's presence. It was not always easy, but it was always worth it. 2 years after their wedding, Helena gave birth to a son. They named him Robert after her father, and he was healthy and loud and utterly perfect. Owen held his son with such wonder in his eyes that Helena fell in love with him all over again. "A father," Owen murmured, touching the baby's tiny hand. "I am someone's father." "You are going to be wonderful at it," Helena said from the bed, exhausted but content. "I hope so. I hope I can give him what my father gave me, roots and principles and the understanding that what matters is how you treat people, not what you own." Robert was followed 3 years later by a daughter they named Sarah after Owen's mother, and then another son named Thomas 2 years after that. The house rang with children's laughter, with the chaos of a growing family. Helena sometimes stood in the doorway watching Owen play with their children, and marveled at how far they had come from two angry teenagers at a riding competition. Samuel Brennan remained a close friend, occasionally showing up with wild stories from his latest cattle drives. He always brought presents for the children and updates from drovers they had worked with. Young Tommy, no longer quite so young, had become a trail boss himself, managing drives with competent confidence. Margaret Pierce lived to see all 3 grandchildren, doting on them with uninhibited joy. When she died peacefully in her sleep at age 72, Helena grieved but also felt grateful that her mother had lived to see her happy and settled, all worries about her daughter's future finally laid to rest. The ranch prospered over the years. Owen's instinct for breeding quality cattle combined with Helena's head for business made them one of the most successful operations in the region. They employed a dozen people year-round, treating workers fairly and paying decent wages, continuing the principles both their fathers had modeled. One evening, 15 years after the cattle drive that had changed everything, Helena and Owen sat on the porch watching the sunset. Their children were grown now, Robert already talking about establishing his own ranch, Sarah courting a young surveyor from town, Thomas still deciding what path he wanted to take. The house was quieter, but the silence was peaceful rather than lonely. "You ever think about that competition?" Helena asked. "The one that started all the animosity?" Owen considered the question. "Sometimes. Mostly I think about what a waste it was, all those years we could have known each other but did not because of pride and hurt. But then I think maybe we needed those years. Maybe we had to grow into the people we became before we could appreciate each other. Perhaps, though I would have liked a few more years together if given the choice. We still have years ahead, many if we are fortunate." He took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin. "And I intend to fill every single day with making sure you know you are loved. I do know, I have always known from the moment you pulled me from that flood." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saved my life that day. You saved mine too, just in a different way. You gave me purpose and partnership and a reason to be the best version of myself." Owen kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Helena Fletcher. I always will. I love you too. Even when I thought I hated you, some part of me was probably already falling." They sat together as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue, stars emerging like diamonds scattered across velvet. Below them, the ranch spread out in peaceful prosperity, the result of years of hard work and mutual dedication. This was their legacy, built on a foundation that had started with hatred but transformed into something far stronger. Inside the house, they could hear Sarah and Thomas arguing good-naturedly about something. Robert's voice joined in, mediating as he often did. The sounds of family, of love, of home. Helena smiled, feeling Owen's steady heartbeat beneath her cheek. They had built this together, from dust and determination, and a cattle drive that forced them to see beyond old grudges. The past could not be changed, but the future stretched ahead full of possibility. And they would face it together, as they had faced every challenge since that river crossing where everything began to shift. partners in every sense, bound by love that had been tested and proven strong enough to last a lifetime. As darkness fell completely and the first stars blazed bright overhead, Helena thought about the girl she had been at 16, so determined to win a race to save her family. She could not go back and tell that girl what was coming, the years of hatred followed by a transformation she never could have imagined. But she could be grateful for every step of the journey, even the painful ones, because they had all led here. To this porch, this man, this life they had built together from rubble and second chances. To love that had grown from the most unlikely soil and bloomed into something beautiful and enduring. To the understanding that sometimes the people who challenge us most are the ones who eventually complete us. The cattle drive had forced them to work as one, but they had chosen to stay as one. And that choice, renewed every day through action and word and steady presence, was the greatest victory of all. Not a trophy or prize money, but something far more valuable. Each other and the life they continued to build together, one day at a time, one moment of love at a time, until the end of their days. Years later, when grandchildren came to visit, they would ask for stories about the old days. Helena and Owen would sit together and tell tales of the great cattle drive, of danger and adventure and the moment when everything changed. They would tell the story of the flood and the rope thrown perfectly, of the kiss on the muddy riverbank. They would tell about learning to see past hatred to the truth underneath. And the grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, as children always do to love stories with happy endings. They would learn that second chances are possible, that growth is always an option, that the heart is capable of transforming poison into medicine if given the chance. They would see in their grandparents' weathered faces and gentle touches what enduring love actually looked like. Robert built his ranch and married a teacher from the new schoolhouse, giving Owen and Helena two grandsons who loved horses as much as their grandfather. Sarah married her surveyor and moved to Sacramento, but visited often with her 3 daughters. Thomas surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, moving to San Francisco but returning every summer to help with the ranch work he had never really left behind. The family grew and spread, but the ranch remained the center, the place where everyone gathered for holidays and celebrations. Helena and Owen became the wise elders, dispensing advice when asked and keeping their opinions to themselves when not. They taught grandchildren to ride, shared stories of the old days, and provided a living example of what partnership meant. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. The house overflowed with people, 3 generations eating and laughing and making enough noise to wake the dead. Helena stood slightly apart from the chaos, watching Owen with a cluster of grandchildren, patiently answering their endless questions. He was 61 now, his hair silver, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still held the same sharp intelligence she had first grudgingly recognized on that cattle drive. He looked up and met her gaze across the crowded room, and the smile that crossed his face was pure love. 30 years, and he still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Helena felt her throat tighten with emotion. They had built such a life together. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, they had created something extraordinary. That night, after everyone had gone to bed or departed for their own homes, Helena and Owen sat in their bedroom, the house finally quiet. Owen helped her unbraid her hair, a ritual they had developed over the years. His fingers were gentle, and Helena closed her eyes, savoring the simple intimacy. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For being stubborn enough to see past my anger, for pulling me from that flood, for 30 years of partnership and love and never giving up on us." Owen wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "Thank you for forgiving me when I did not deserve it, for taking a chance on us, for building this life with me." He paused. "For being the most remarkable woman I have ever known." They stayed like that for a long while, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and chosen each other every day since. The ranch was quiet around them, the California nights soft and warm. In the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. Somewhere a coyote called and another answered. This was their kingdom, hard won and carefully tended. These were their years, marked by laughter and tears, challenges overcome and joys celebrated. This was their love story, starting in hatred and ending in devotion so deep it had become the bedrock of an entire family. Helena turned in Owen's arms and kissed him, slow and sweet and full of 3 decades of shared life. "I love you, Owen Fletcher. I love you, Helena Fletcher. Forever." And that promise, made and kept through countless trials and triumphs, was the truest thing either of them had ever known. Two people who had hated each other for years, forced together by circumstance, choosing each other every day until death would eventually part them. But even then, their love would endure in the children and grandchildren they had raised, in the ranch they had built, in the story that would be told for generations. The story of the cattle drive that changed everything. The story of hatred transformed into love. The story of second chances and hard-won forgiveness and the extraordinary power of partnership. Their story, complete and beautiful and exactly as it was meant to be.